I'm a history teacher. I know a great deal about the history of countries around the world, especially countries that have had to deal with big problems. I probably don't need to tell you this, but the United States has some very, very big problems. And the history would indicate that countries with the type and scope of the problems that the United States is facing do not really have happy endings. I am deeply concerned that that's where we're heading. Allow me to explain. One of the biggest problems in the United States, and you probably don't need me to tell you this, is wealth inequality. 5% of the country owns anywhere between, I should say this, the top 5% of the country owns anywhere between 60 to 75% of all the wealth in the country. This has continued getting worse and worse and worse. During the pandemic, while most Americans were struggling, many were dying, the wealthiest people in the United States increased their wealth by over 120 some percent. This is made worse by the fact that we have one of the worst healthcare systems amongst wealthy countries. We get the worst amount of care out of the 11 top countries that are on par with the United States. We are last when it comes to the quality of healthcare we receive, and we pay almost twice as much per capita for that healthcare. Every day in the United States, there is rampant gun violence. It would take days if I were to just sit here and list the name of famous mass shootings that have occurred in the last few years, and that would only be in the last few years. Not going back, into the 90s. You get the point here. Rampant gun violence that we can do nothing about. Our health is declining. About 40% of Americans are considered obese. Rates of mental health, especially amongst younger generations, mental health issues amongst younger generations especially are going through the roof, including Gen Z. Millennials have a lot of mental health issues, and reports of stress and feelings of being overwhelmed are through the roof. This is all exacerbated by Trump's recent passing of the big, beautiful bill, which certainly is not beautiful, although I'll admit it's definitely very big. This will further grant the wealthiest Americans a massive tax cut. It's about a $2 trillion overall tax cut. 50% of that will go to the top 1% of the country, so about $1 trillion in tax cuts to the wealthiest 1%. Massive cuts to Medicaid, so people who might be relying on government-sponsored health care will no longer be able to access that. And all of that is coming on top of polls and surveys that show that trust in the American government, trust in Congress, trust in the president are at an all-time low. It's like pouring gasoline on a fire, all right? All the legitimate ways to solve these problems seem to be inaccessible. Both the Democratic and Republican parties are massively corrupt. Noam Chomsky was famously talked about. There is a positive feedback cycle in our political system whereby having a lot of money allows you to accrue more power. Then having more power allows you to accrue more money, more power, more power, more money. You can see it's an endless cycle, which basically gives the wealthiest people the most power, the most, if not infinite amount of power if they spend enough money. Elon Musk's recent announcement that he's forming a third political party might be useful in that it splits the Republican vote, but doesn't that worry folks that a billionaire, the wealthiest man in the world, can just start a political party and start having influence just because he has a massive amount of wealth? I'll try to get off of that tangent. I'll talk about wealth inequality and political corruption another time. My point here is to say this. The political system is failing to address these problems that the United States is facing. People are getting angrier and angrier, and the country is awash in guns. We've already seen what can come of this in the form of Luigi Mangione, who, killed a healthcare executive with a gun out of anger over the United Healthcare's treatment of patients, its attempts to limit providing coverage for medical procedures. That sort of rage is prevalent all over the country, and it came out especially clearly when, after Luigi Mangione was caught for doing that alleged crime, there was a massive pro-Luigi Mangione outcry on the internet. Tons of people came to his support. He was viewed as a hero. To this day, I've seen people wearing Luigi Mangione shirts, still pro-Luigi Mangione posts. People openly talk about how much they like him in private. They may not put it online, but they will talk to you about it in private. That means that a large chunk of the population is starting to feel like violence is okay because of how abandoned they feel by the political system, how ill it has served them. And unless something is done to correct this interminable slide, I worry that it's inevitable. There was a book written not too long ago called The Great Leveler, and it talks about, it's a large study across cultures and time periods that shows that wealth inequality, massive wealth inequality in societies, is typically only reduced by a few things. It is not reduced much through legislation or through democratic political processes. It typically gets reduced, if it gets really bad, through massive upheaval in terms of violence, state collapse, pandemic disease, or some sort of other disaster. Those are the things that massively reduce wealth inequality. Oh, and I forgot to mention war. Okay. We saw during World War II a massive decrease in wealth inequality because the government needed to implement programs to make sure people were happy and were able to work without internal upheaval while we were fighting a war. The Black Death saw a pretty big increase in wealth equality. So these are not positive things, and COVID increased wealth inequality. So what do we think is going to happen? What's going to massively decrease wealth inequality in the United States? Apparently, unless we have a different pandemic disease that is worse, it won't be that. What does that leave? State collapse or violence? It's just something to think about. I am deeply concerned. I think you should be too. And the politicians have failed us. More to think about.